welcome to this room, which is brought to you by the Tarot and Tea Psychic Cafe. The Tarot and Tea Psychic Cafe is a collective of spiritual workers, all working in different modalities of different experiences and so on, but all working in acts of service and with a spiritual perspective to help people in whatever way we are able to. So this is our ethos, and we work collaboratively, we support one another, and we exist not only here on Clubhouse but across other social media platforms, and also you will find us at live events as well. So that's a little bit about who we are. If you're not already following the Tarot and Tea Psychic Cafe on Clubhouse, please do click on the little greenhouse. My name is Melanie, and I am the founder of the Tarot and Tea Psychic Cafe. And I've decided to set up this series of rooms, Tarot and Tea Psychic Cafe Presents, to introduce you to all our amazing members and the things that they do, for you to get to know our people a little better. So today, we're going to be talking to Robert. Now, I myself am a therapeutic tarot practitioner and holistic health therapist. I do energy work, I do dream interpretation, I do a variety of things, and I've been working in this area for over 30 years. Now we're going to stop talking about me, and I'm going to turn the attention to Robert. Robert, hello.
Howdy, y'all.
So, although I am going to be getting into grilling you, as you say, in the hot seat, would you like to introduce yourself first and foremost?
Yes, if I could speak, that would be great. So my name is Robert, but you can just call me Rob, and I am a multi multi faith pagan practicing different forms of spirituality. I'm a spirit worker. I'm a diviner, specifically specializing in the runes such as the Irish Ogham, the Norse Outer Futhark. I also practice and perform various techniques for trance working. Some people would call shamanistic, sort of uh, practices based off of the various traditions that I practice. Um, I'm also an energy work healer. I'm a celebrant, which means I am able to help people plan, design, and perform different mundane life passages, as well as spiritual holidays, festivals, marriages, funerals, those kind of things. At the moment, I'm not able to do that legally, but it is my goal to one day to get licensed for that, so I can do that legally. At the moment, I'm just doing it spiritually, but it's still most of the people that I help, though, they still find it a very powerful thing, despite the lack of any legal binding to that or officialness to that, or whatever term you want to use. I'm also a spirit worker. I have been working with various spirits, various deities, various beings. And I've been doing all this for over 15, 16, 17 years, give or take. It's hard for me to exactly keep track of time, but officially I've been doing this since roughly 2005, 2006. So take that as you will. Um, I'm trying to think of anything else major. Like, there's so much stuff that I do. That sometimes it's like, do I talk about this? Did I talk about that? Did I forget about anything? Oh, the other main thing that that normally doesn't get brought up is I'm also a professional magician in the sense that I do depending on the situation, depending on the person, um, will do magic for other people, and I also am a poet. I'm a professional lyricist and poet and storyteller. And while I haven't done anything professionally in that sort of avenue for a few years, at one point I was on a regular basis selling lyrics and poetry I wrote to different magazines, different mostly in local areas, up and coming garage bands, pub bands, those kind of things.
That's amazing, Robert. And I love that you've been able to give us more detail than we would normally hear when you do a room introduction. Um, So I'm going to go straight for the big question, okay? Because bearing in mind we are here, Tarot
Give
and
me
Tea
your best
Psychic
shot.
Cafe. Um, what what was it that began your spiritual journey? Now, obviously, we're all spiritual beings having a
Hmm.
human experience, so you could say birth and before. But was there a period of time that accelerated your spiritual journey?
Um, yeah, kinda. Well, it's a long, complicated story, but essentially, I mean, my background is such. One could technically say that I came from a form of hereditary spellcasters, though I did not know this at the time. Like, psychic, spiritual stuff in very specific forms is a sort of a family tradition. Mine, but I didn't really get started into what I do until I was roughly preteen, teenage, but I did not. I did not officially get started with things until I was 16, and most of that is due to doing the proper research, not having the right resources. Like, I at the time, I knew what I wanted to do. I roughly knew what I believe, and I roughly knew what I wanted to do, but I needed to learn. I wanted to learn not only to explore my own personal abilities, how they manifest me individually, because yes, you're correct, we're all psychic and spiritual in some way, shape, or form, but how that manifests is going to be unique to the individual. How we see the world and how it reacts to us. And so it took me a number of years to do the research. I had the lack of proper resources for a while, and until I got up to what I would consider adequate. But for me, the main thing that really got me going is technically my blindness, because and the fact that I've always had my strongest spiritual ability has always been what is usually considered or called clairvoyancy. um, I've always had a sense of being able to see something spiritual 24/7 since I was around, the age of 3, 4. But I went and learned what this was, how to interact with it, how to use it to my advantage until, once again, roughly my preteen, teenage years. But it was combination of knowing that there was some spiritual stuff going on, and then just having random spiritual experiences, both positive and negative, over the years. Everything from um, getting lost and being found by a goddess masquerading as a person when I was a kid, to um, unfortunately getting involved with someone who thought it would be a good idea to play around with certain divination tools without knowing how to use them properly, and calling forth a demon, to to everything in between. And then, with that aside, just the fact that there are, even in my family, with members who aren't necessarily abundantly psychic or spiritual, would have some of the most uncanny experiences. And it's just all those things just kind of uh, culminated at one point where it just came very abundant to me. It's like, this is not going anywhere. This is not going away. Like, this is a part of me, and I can either, you know, be lazy and waste what is there, what I got, or I can use it. And I find that it's more than just a calling. It's literally, my, the way of my life, I guess.
It is interesting, isn't it, how this journey just lands in our laps and it's like, here, deal with this. And I feel that's kind of what you're describing. Um, in terms of the not spiritual, um, and for me personally, I feel that some of the not spiritual things that I did were actually a part of learning skills that I would need to use in the life I live now. I know, for example, so looking at those things for you, I know, for example, you've been an advocate
Hmm.
for civil rights and things. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So to kind of lead into this, as anyone who knows me, who's interacted with me, who's seen me here on Clubhouse, I am blind. And I've always been like my eye condition is a genetic disorder that I was born with, but it really didn't start truly manifesting in a very solid way until like roughly the age 11 or 12. I wasn't properly diagnosed until I was 16. Didn't really start hitting me until like my last couple years of in teenage, my first couple years of being an adult. So, generally speaking, I don't really have a huge resume of the typical 9 to 5 jobs that the average person would have. But the few jobs that I have had over the years that is sort of non spiritual, but definitely has given me certain tools and experiences to help me along the way are such as being a quasi professional but mostly amateur storm chaser, being a apprentice to a veterinarian, which unfortunately didn't go anywhere, being a bartender, and being a social blah, blah, if I could speak, social activist, specifically specializing in PR. And that specifically, since you asked about that specifically, essentially when I moved to another country, when I moved to Canada. I'm from the United States. I live in the United States currently, but I lived in Canada for a few years between 2012 and 2015, and I got involved with a social activist organization. And because I didn't have anything else, that took up my time, I found myself getting involved more and more. And apparently, they were looking for someone to head up their PR department, which is nothing more than to say, hey, we need someone who can speak well enough, who knows what they're talking about, who is fairly photogenic, that can stand in front of the camera or in front of a radio and talk to people and not only explain things, because the organization itself has had some controversial backlash in the past. So they want someone who could easily say, hey, despite what you may think what this is actually what we're doing, this is why we're here and whatnot. And so I did that for roughly three and a half years. And yeah, yeah, it was very fun. It helped a lot of people. But yes, I would say that all the mundane things I've done in my life has given me skills, some interesting skills as far as my spiritual practice goes. Like for example, with the activism, um, it has, for one thing, especially being the having experience as PR person, relations, is being able to speak to people, but also saying, "Hey, hey Rob, I'm looking for this thing, or I would love to get started with something," and it's like, well, here's what I know, but here, let me connect you to people that can get you to where you need to go and where you want to go. And more importantly, here, let me help open the door and talk to them and get you to where you need to go. So yeah.
So, I'm not surprised that you were doing that level of media interaction, because within the collective, there is a little bit, not teasing exactly, but we do like to talk about your radio voice. The fact that you have a very attractive voice. You have a voice that was made for broadcasting.
Well, thank you. I actually did try to work for radio at one point. Unfortunately, did not work out, and the only station I could even that who would was even thinking about taking me was a channel, or was a station that I was not all that fond of, and I almost got employed at one point, and I stopped in the middle of the process. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm as much as I love music and I love talking and conversing with people, and I love radio at the time. Do I really want to work at a station with a genre of music that I'm not particularly fond of? And yeah, so I turned that down.
Well, there was another thing that you missed off your introduction resume. You're a musician as well.
Yes, I am a musician. Um, not as well. My being a musician is not as strong as my being a poet or being a storyteller or being a lyricist, but I am a bit of a musician. I can play a little bit of a number of instruments. The only instrument I can really play fluently, I guess you could say, is the drums or percussion in general. But I also can play a tiny bit of the tin whistle or penny whistle, um, as well as a bit of the cello.
Now, I see that we're already getting questions. So, Yay Yay has said, Rob, you do have a radio voice and personality, and wants to know what about a podcast of your own?
I'm in the process of working on a podcast. I had a podcast at one point years ago. Unfortunately, due to shenanigans as well as discrimination on the part of the platform that I was a part of at the time, my podcast got removed. But I am in the process of building one. I'm actually hoping to get a episode or two recorded in the next week or so I can get that up and running.
I will keep you posted in that case. So, Rob, let's take it back to the spiritual. So, I know that there are a number of different, shall we say, avenues that your spirituality takes,
Mm-hmm.
different traditions that you follow. Do you want to
Mm-hmm.
maybe tell us a little bit about that? Because people here will know you from your rooms that you do on working with the Fae, and
Mm-hmm.
also your work with the runes. But yeah, let's hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I practice six traditions. And sometimes they overlap. Sometimes I do them synchronistically, but I mostly try to, keep them as fairly separate as possible. Though, when you're dealing with, spirits, beings who have their own personalities, their own agency, things just like any sort of relationships get messy, and I mean that in the best and most respectful of ways. But I practice Irish, Norse, Welsh, Roman, Egyptian, and Sumerian forms of spirituality, and occasionally, as an extension of the Norse and Germanic side of my practice, I occasionally also practice a bit of Pennsylvanian German folk religion, folk magic.
So, how much is your practice informed by your own personal heritage and your community?
A large of it is. I was raised knowing that my family came from, mostly, or at the time, mostly Irish and related roots. And both myself, being an avid researcher, as well as my uncle, one of my uncles, who is also a researcher, we kind of took it onto ourselves to become the family historians. He did it because he was wanting to find out where exactly a particular part of our family came from, or at least his side of it. I did it because of the stories. I mean, yeah, I was interested to see where our roots were, but also the stories of the people. I always find stories extremely intriguing. But a large part of it comes from ancestry. It took me a lot of years, a lot of tears, blood and sweat, so to speak, and a lot of problems because I originally had someone who tried to do my ancestry for me, my genealogy for me, and they were gung ho about like they did a decent job, but what they did was they looked at a couple, they only looked at a couple sources. They didn't look at everything that was, they prioritize certain possibilities over others. And then of course when I went to go to take what she had given me and try to do the research myself, I came to find out that I had a cousin, a third cousin, who I knew of but have never been really close with, had already mapped out our family history roughly all the way back to around 8 or 9 AD in certain places and certain branches. And so finding out that we have branches in our family, mostly Irish, Welsh, and Norwegian, and well, Scandinavian in general, as well as German, and then Roman and French, and basically all over Europe, with a tiny bit of Native American and like Italian slash Roman Egyptian, and a tiny bit of several hundred years ago um, Arabic Spanish, or Arabic Spain, which is yeah, like. But to get back to answer your question, the root of your question, while it's not the only reason why I practice what I practice, it does help inform to some extent. Like it is important. Like I got into it. Well, I came into it first with the love of the stories of the myths and the folklore, and then finding out, hey, I got family members who came from those places, who may have known some of those stories, to a certain extent. And then on top of that, interacting with those beings, those spirits, those gods that are connected to those traditions from those places, it just kind of became a whole mosaic of threads and reasons. And yeah, so while it's not the only reason I do what I do and I practice what I practice, it is important.
It sounds like a beautiful tapestry, Robert. So, um, I know that, your spiritual practice is not all you've inherited from your family. There's been some guides that have come to you, that are family guides as well.
Yes, yes. There are a few. The probably the most prominent, most important is my companion Frederick, who is a dwarf, and he is actually my originally my dad's companion, and he saved my dad's life. I don't know if anyone listening may be familiar with the Mothman stuff that happened, the whole Mothman thing that happened back in I think it's the 60s here in West Virginia, where the bridge on the Ohio River collapsed, and at Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And my dad was actually in the process. Well, biologically, he's my grandfather, but I was raised by him. He was in the process of getting a job, and was waiting to hear back from them. And what should have been one of the people who had been on that bridge at the time, who unfortunately died during that tragedy. But he was interacting with what he believed, and he still believes to this day, is his guardian angel, um, but is our family's dwarf companion, Frederick, who saved his life and has been instrumental in keeping him fairly safe and whole despite other shenanigans throughout the years, and has become a fixture of our household ever since. He's been with our family for over 60 years now. And he's not the only one who I've inherited as far as companions. There's one that occasionally comes around, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name properly, but she is a um, technically Fae, but she is known as a. I think in English they're known as wheat birds, and they're basically fairy-like beings from German folklore that guard the crops in the fields during summer, during the planting season, the harvest season. And I have inherited her through um, my great one of my great grandmothers and her branch of the family, which is very much Pennsylvania German.
And, something that I've always thought was pretty incredible, is the home where you live in, and the fact that there's quite a lot of fey energy regarding your home and the garden that it sits in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of my companions, Florentina, is a rose nymph, and she dwells in a rose bush that practically corners well, it covers one entire corner of my yard. It's the entire rose bush is roughly 14 feet long and almost 7 feet tall in some places. And it is a rose bush that was planted by one of my great grandmothers around the turn of the century, so around like I don't know the exact date, but I think it was like 1904, 1905, something like that. And she has been a Tina, just nicknaming her short. She has been a fixture in commandeering, dwelling in that rose bush, turning it into what is known as a fairy thorn. Um, Ever since. And it's been interesting because there was at one point I wasn't sure if she was actually there, or if we had a fairy there, but then I would notice that one of my neighbors would constantly cut down the parts of the bush that would dangle over to his yard, and then terrible stuff would happen to him and his family, to the point that it was definitely fairy in nature. And then I'm like, okay, well, I need to figure this out one way or another. And after listening to stories from my dad about his experience with that phenomenon growing up, I actually, at this point, of course, I had a strong practice with the fairy faith and fairy craft, and set out to either, okay, who is it, and what are they, and can I build a more closely intimate relationship with. And so she's been one of my companions since.
I think it's such a wonderful thing to have such deep connections to your home, and to your family through your home. So it's beautiful. And yeah, I do hope your neighbor learns. So, eventually you've got to think, maybe I should stop cutting this rose bush.
Well, and it's not just him either. Florentina is very conscientious about nature. So I will occasionally see people throw like litter, like cigarette butts or beer cans or whatnot, into my yard, and then literally a couple minutes later trip and fall and like break their nose, or literally trip and like knock over like a bunch of snacks and whatnot if they are like coming from like a convenience store, or whatever the case may be. But it's, on one hand, it's like, well, that's what you get for littering in general, but second of all, that's what you get for littering in the domain of a fairy. They're going to get their due, and you're going to have to pay the piper for it.
Ouch. Okay, so we talked a little bit about your heritage and your
Mm-hmm.
spiritual journey and your home
Mm-hmm.
and some of the energies that you work with. Tell us about your runes journey, because obviously you're well known here on Clubhouse for reading with runes.
Yeah. So, my journey with the runes was fairly straightforward to some extent. So when it comes to divination, like most people, the first form of divination that I had been introduced to was tarot. However, this was back in the early 2000s, and there weren't really any method of making tarot accessible. And when I truly came across it, well, there are other circumstances why I couldn't work with tarot. I had also been cursed at one point, but by the time I got uncursed and was actually looking into tarot, my vision got to the point that I could no longer read print. And so I'm like, okay, well, I do believe that divination is an important part of one's practice, especially when you're interacting with deities, entities, beings, spirits, what have you, as well as other kinds of phenomenon. And I went looking for something that was a little bit more accessible. And of course, I came across the Irish runes, and found out that they were originally carved, etched in both stone and wood. Same with the Elder Futhark, the Norse runes. And so I got into the Elm first, and I started reading them, learning them, both like reading about them, but also reading with them, here and there. In fact, the first time I ever got to read in public with them, I was actually at a tarot event, and was waiting to go elsewhere, but my bus stop was right next to where like a psychic fair was going on, and mostly specializing in tarot. And I was just thought I'd practice by myself, and people would come up and was like, "Hey, what's that?" They actually thought I was a fixture there, and well, I did a couple readings, and then started like formalizing my practice with the Ohm, and then with the Norse runes, I came so okay, so I when I was a lot younger, when I was preteens and early teenage years, all the way up to about age 16, I was also a visual artist. Mostly doodling and mostly specializing in gel inks, gel pens. And I'm both then and now, mundane wise, I do a lot of fantasy, writing, reading fan fiction, cosplay, those kind of things. I play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and I was working on a character and was trying to come up with a coat of arms for them, and I kept drawing the symbol. And when one day I'm hanging out with a friend of mine, and they are the first heathen or Norse pagan that I had ever come across, was showing me the Elder Futh art for the first time, and I started noticing that the coat of arms, the symbol that I created for a character that I would roleplay as for several years, was a combination of two runes, Yera and Ingwaz. And so I'm like, okay, all right, well, this is interesting to say the least. I should explore this. I should look into this. And I started doing that, and then I started having spiritual experiences coming out from that, like separate from that, but kind of um, tentatively related to it or vaguely related to it, connected to it. And it one thing led me also going down to down the road of practicing a couple of different forms of Norse spirituality.
So, I mean, that obviously has formed a huge part of your life. The journey actually started the runes and brought you to some of your deities and your practice.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, it might be the other way around, but it's one thing led to the other. Um, Talking of spirituality and faith
hmm
and religion, what was your religious background like, and did it have an impact, positive or negative, on you?
So I grew up in a mix Lutheran and Southern Baptist background. Most of my family are Southern Baptists, Christians, but there are the cousins of mine who are still living who are of the who are from the Pennsylvania German culture, do practice Lutheran form of Christianity. But I grew up specifically uh, in a mostly Southern Baptist um, background, and it never really took because I was, as my friends and my family would tell you to this day, that I was kind of weird in the best of ways as a kid, and also way too precocious and smart for my own good, like reading things, getting into things far beyond the the by the age that I should have, like. To the points that I will joke. It's like looking back on it, I don't think that this was such a good idea for my parents to let me read this at this age, so on and so forth. But like they took me to Sunday school, and the methods by which the people there tried to get us to get to be engaged with that never really worked for me, and I would later try to get back into it more officially around age 11, 12, 13 because of a close friend of mine. That didn't pan out for a number of reasons. Um, and, but I guess for me, partly because I already kind of unconsciously, well, not so much unconsciously, like I actively had these beliefs. Like I was already a polytheist. I just didn't have the terminology for it. And there would be things where people would bring up and I'm like, I don't agree with that. Like, and it's not like a hey, I think that, you're stupid or whatever. It was nothing like that. It was just like, look, that's awesome that that's part of your thing and that you believe in that, but this no, I and I didn't have the words or an intellectual way of, describing it or articulating it. But I'm just like, no, it's not where I stand, and I left. And it also didn't help, or maybe it did help, depending on how you looked at things, that even as a child, I kind of had unconsciously had this idea or this understanding that there were members of my family who were very Christian, who were psychics, who had active, abundant psychic abilities. A lot of them would do everything in their power to ignore it or not do anything with it, for a number of reasons. But just seeing little things happen here and there with them, it just won't. It was just another thing that just kind of led me. It's like, hey, and I think also while my family were more into wanting me to get, more interested in, say, the Bible, I was far more interested in fairy tales. Like, and by fairy tales, I mean like the old Irish, Welsh fairy tales of the Ishi, the fairy folk, and all that jazz. And so, in a lot of ways, like my path was already kind of set out for me in some ways. I just did not know it and would not know it for a number of years. And unfortunately, it did cause a lot of problems with my family, especially when I came out as pagan and as psychic and as spiritual, actively. Well, psychically and spiritually first, and then pagan later. And I think a large part of that, looking back on it, is because there was still a lot of members of my family for a number of reasons. Some valid, I would consider valid. Some I would consider not. Who were basically, no, this is not a thing. This is not happening. It's not happening in our family. And like what grief I received from that was unfortunately simply them using me and my journey as a outlet to to anguish and whatnot over the fact that they were not wanting to acknowledge or accept what they had, and to be totally honest, have wasted. And it is what it is.
That pushback and that resistance that you received from some people in your family and probably community too, to you coming out of the broom closet, um, did it make you more determined? Was it off-putting at any point? Did you think, oh, maybe I'm not on the right path here? How strong was it? And also, do you believe that, because you've told me a lot about the lady who built your house,
Mm-hmm.
that you live in now,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that she was quite magical. You've mentioned finding witch bottles in the
Mm-hmm.
walls and all sorts. Um, do you think that there was a rejection of who she was that had remained in your family that led to that resistance?
Oh, totally, totally. That was one of the main reasons why members of my family would absolutely refuse to acknowledge or accept what they had, because it was very well known on both sides that there was magic, there was psychic phenomenon going back for generations. I mean, that from I would hear stories before the last fixture of the foundation, which is where I found some of those witch bottles about a decade or so ago. I would hear stories of them doing some changes, or digging up some things and finding witch bottles and talismans for wards and all kinds of things. And they're like, nope, nope, I didn't see that at all. We're putting that back down in there. But yeah, a large part was just, like I said, them not wanting to accept it and rejecting it. And I know for a fact that from the maternal side of my family, a large part of that was because it came from my great grandmother and her family, who, like I said, were her branch was specifically Pennsylvania German, and she was a child and a teenager during the 40s. Um, and or sorry, no, the 20s. She was an adult during the 40s, and my parents, like I said, biologically, my grandparents, especially my mom, she grew up seeing her mother be that person that you hear about stereotypically here in the Appalachian region, of being that wise woman who lives up the holler that everybody goes to when they don't have the money to go to the doctor, they don't have the money, to get stuff done, or there's something unlucky, something weird going on, and them just praying about it is not helping the matter, whatever the case may be. I know for a fact that that was a large part of why my mom, for example, who her mother taught her stuff, where she just threw out all the things that her mother got her. Like apparently, her mother had gotten her a I don't know what kind of tarot deck it was, but it was a tarot deck. Um, all the way back from that was back in like early 1900s, and my mom had kept it up until till she know I was starting to get into it actively, and then she threw it away. In fact, the first time that I started really collecting things like a crystal ball, first tarot deck, though I didn't get to use it, and other sort of things. They actively took it outside one night and set it all on fire. So yeah, it was a very
Oh,
strong
wow.
rejection. Yeah. Hmm.
That must have been devastating.
Um. Yeah. I was punished. Several times growing up, and I was determined. But there were times that I myself wanted to reject it or wanted to walk away from things, but that was mostly because I went through a very dark time in my teenage years, and that was mostly because, like I mentioned earlier in this conversation, a friend who I got involved with, friend slash boyfriend I got involved with at the time, decided that he wanted to play around with certain things that he didn't have training or knowledge of, and ended up calling forth a demon. And um, we it almost it really played havoc with my general mental health for a bit. And so there was a point in time where that combined with being heavily bullied for a number of reasons, and with my family punishing me, um, where I just like, you know what, I'm not going to go any further. I'm just going to let this go. But fortunately, that was not a choice that I was allowed to make, or the spirits were not allowed to let me make. Among other things, they really wanted someone to sort of rekindle those traditions in this family, and they decided that me and my younger sister were the ones, to do that. So, and not just like non-human spirits involved, but also like family ancestors, the ones that had since passed and were really getting upset with the fact that all the things that they had done and had put in effort, time, energy into the family was basically being squandered and, just rejected as like, nope, nope, this did not help us at all. And of course, I would continue to have spiritual and psychic, both positive and negative phenomenon happening until I finally decided to just go full steam ahead, damn the consequences, and I haven't looked back since.
So, you overcame that. There are a lot of people, even now, who are going through the kind of rejection of their gifts or doubts, particularly based on religious views that family
Hmm.
members might have, or they might feel that they're betraying certain ideals held by their community, but they have the spiritual gifts, they have the insights, they have the communications coming through, and they have this calling to something maybe a bit wilder.
Hmm.
What would your advice be to people going through a similar situation?
Well, I mean, it's going to be different for people of different backgrounds, different situations. There is no real one size fit all. But one thing I would definitely recommend, especially for minors, because that's a large part of why I was kind of helpless to move forward, is sometimes. Okay, first and foremost, it's okay to be silent. In fact, in a lot of magical traditions, Um, Witchcraft, for example, they do tell you there are times where you need to be silent, especially for your own protection. Research things, study much as you can when you're at a point that you cannot openly practice. And, you know, what one of the things I did is my family knew that I was a writer. And so I would have, yes, I would have notebooks, tons and tons of notebooks for poetry, for lyrics, but I would convert some of those into where I would have some of the very beginning of the notebook would be for lyrics and poetry and story ideas, and some of the ending would be, but then the middle portion of it would be focused on, all right, here's my notes on how you do this, how you do that, what's this thing, and just gather resources until you find yourself at a point where you can, open up and practice openly, practice actively, protection, protecting yourself, staying safe. Um, Especially in the face of discrimination and prejudice is hugely important.
How important a role did mentoring and guidance play for you? Did you have mentors and
No,
guidance?
I had no mentors. Um, I had no active mentors in my journey, and that was mostly because I would come across resources that I was looking for to, because like I said, almost from the very beginning I knew where I wanted to go. I knew what I wanted to practice. I knew the skills that I wanted to obtain, and I would come across people who would claim that they could help me get there, but in reality, I would keep coming across people who, not that they didn't know what they were doing, but it wasn't exactly what I was looking for. It was like a different perspective. I'm not saying that was bad. It was just, excuse me, not what I was looking for, not what I wanted. And I wasn't willing to take the time to um, to put on hiatus my own personal journey to learn something from someone that I wasn't interested in learning. So no, I never ever had a active um, mentor. The closest I ever came to a mentor, that relationship died a most painful death because of jealousy on the part of the other person. Because one of the traditions I practice within Irish, Welsh, and Norse spirituality, and there's different terms for it. Bard is a very well-known term for it, but basically not just one who entertains, but one who is does things on a spiritual level. A seer, I don't like using the term, but a shaman, a witch, but all bound up in like inspiration. And sometimes a lot of the people who practice those things, those sub traditions or those sub specialities in those traditions, can be very cutthroat. And so there would be a lot of times I'd meet someone and they're like, "Hey, I can help you learn about this," and then that relationship would not go anywhere because of just jealousy. Um, just jealousy or greed or whatever the case may be. And I have made a lot of friends. I have people that I talk to, but it's not a mentor apprentice or a mentoree relationship. It's like equals colleague relationships. Um, in fact, the closest I've true have ever had to a successful mentoring relationship, she never officially became a mentor, but she was the one who helped me get on my path of Filiach, which is the Irish spirit poet tradition, years and years ago. And it wasn't so much here, let me share things with you, here, let me mentor, you could come to me. It was more of, here's the resources that I found that are accessible. She opened the door, she helped me get the paved the way for things. But then we lost contact, and then years later we would pop back up and meet each other once again. And now she and I and a bunch of other people who practice the same thing, get together to share experiences and to give ideas and advice and counsel whenever someone needs it. So, yeah, uh, that makes any sense whatsoever.
It makes a lot of sense. And we have been having the most amazing conversation. We've got about 10 minutes left. So I have two questions for you.
Sure.
The first one has been about the impact of community and the internet.
Um,
Because
it.
obviously, not having people in your life,
Mhm.
in your community that were willing
Mhm.
to support, that were accepting
Mhm.
at that time. Did you find your community online? And obviously, here you are in our community, the Psychic Cafe.
Mhm.
How's that been for you?
Oh, it has been both a beautiful and bittersweet experience. Like the internet and community online has been, and on the phone too. Although that's kind of the same thing at this point with smartphones, but has been a vital importance to my practice and to my journey because I have found so many wonderful people over the years that have helped build great communities. And sometimes those communities fall apart. That's where the bittersweetness comes from. I have built I have become part of communities, and then things would happen. Some people would pass away. Some people would lose their way along the journey, and bitterment or whatever. Um, excuse me. Um, infighting, drama. It happens sometimes, but one of the things that I've learned in my life is if you're meant to remain friends and remain walking a similar road or being in one's life, you will, no matter what. And in fact, the community that I've built or have helped build with the people in my life, especially in the blind spiritual sense, the past few years. A couple of people were ones that I met in the beginning of my journey as a blind person, and didn't really get to know them all that well back then. But then in the past few years, not only got to know them a lot better, but have become super close friends with. So yes, the internet has been such a treasure, a boon, um, to my journey and to my practice over the years. I would not be the person I am today in a lot of ways without it, and without the community that I've come across, that I've stumbled on, and that I've pieced together on and off in so many different variants and versions over the years.
Well, our little community of the Tarot and Tea Psychic Cafe and Clubhouse, more widely, um, is so much the better for having you in it. The next question I have is, what's next for Robert Brown? Where is your mission taking you?
Um, so many different things, but a large part of my goals right now is mostly close to home. Slowly been taking over my house and whatnot, but like I am working on building, getting podcast up, getting a website built, so on and so forth. One of my ultimate goals is to get legal certification to be a legal celebrant so that I can do things legally as much as spiritually. And I would like to eventually not just do live events like divination, but I also would like to do like live spirit work sessions with people, energy work session with people. A lot of going to, which I already kind of do to some extent, but I'd like to expand it more of helping people with their spiritual problems, like spiritual critters and beings kind of being hostile. I'm also would like to finish writing and get published my first book of poetry, and I'm hoping at one point to get back to doing stand-up performances of not just my poetry, but poetry in general.
That's beautiful. Um, let's see, how are we doing? So we've got 5 minutes to go. I want to read out some of the comments, and I
Mm-hmm.
would encourage anyone in the audience who would like to have me share anything with Rob to make comments in the room chat. But Lorna White, this was in response to you talking about your podcasting. Lorna said, I'm going to be following you, Rob. I look forward to hearing your pod. And Amber said, definitely lots of fate energies around Rob.
Thank you.
And if anyone has anything else that they would like to share with Robert, now is the time to put it there. Um, in terms of the services you offer
Hmm.
currently,
Yep.
what's available to people if they've listened to this and they think Rob's fascinating? I love what he's saying. I love his approach.
Hmm.
I'd be interested in working with him and buying services from him. What are you offering currently?
Well, I'm still very much in the process of setting up ways of being booked and all that jazz. But a lot of the stuff that I don't necessarily have written up, but what I do offer, obviously the rune readings. I also offer guided meditations where I will help people walk them through meditations. I will, celebrations, helping them plan or design or even perform various spiritual or mundane celebrations. Um, Getting in touch with their deities or their spirits. I've also, I know there's a term for it, but I can't think of what it is. But in the same vein, if they've already started getting in touch with their peeps, spiritually speaking, but they want some guidance or a mediator to kind of help them formally talk with them to get to know them a little bit better, I also do that. Energy work, specifically with the Irish cauldrons of life. Um, I do that. I offer that. In a lot of ways, it's the same things as you would find in a Reiki services, clearings, healing. There's so much more that you can do with that system. Um, but and also spell work. Like I said, I joke that I am a magician, a mercenary magician for hire. Within reason. Within reason. I very much do things by a certain set of ethics. I'm not just gonna willy nilly do something for a person if their need is not like valid or not legitimate. And of course, that's going to depend on each individual. But I do offer magical services, be it help them with a magical situation or spiritual situation, or help them come up with a ritual or a spell, and if need be, show them how to perform it. Just some of the things I do.
Just and that is really just a fraction of some of the things that you do. I know this. Amy has put a beautiful comment here. Rob, you have impacted my journey so vastly. Your connection, integrity, and abilities have guided and encouraged me. I am so thankful for you and so delighted to listen to your journey.
Oh, I am so touched. But Amy is an amazing person, and we haven't done it in a while, unfortunately, for a number of reasons. But we do the Fellowship of the Fae together, and she is an amazing person as well. But thank you very much, Amy. That's so delightful.
Absolutely. And I imagine at some point soon it will be Amy in the hot seat and I'll be asking her questions about her journey. Um,
Mwahahaha.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing your journey and your wisdom and your stories with us. Um, and yeah, I hope it's helped people get to know you a little better.
Oh yeah, because I do know that sometimes with people they see the runes I do either on here or elsewhere, they're like, okay, what are runes? Who is this dude? So I do hope that this helps make me a little bit more approachable, presentable, more so than I already try to try to be. But it's thank you for having me here, Melanie. It's always great to chat. As I joke, well, somewhat joke. I have a thirst for conversation that could drain the Mississippi.
You and me both. And yes, you and I will often burn the midnight oil talking about all sorts of nonsense, including pagans at church mission fates holding chainsaws. So that's a whole nother story that I'm going to hint at to the audience. And oh, and we've got another comment. Marnie said, "Lovely interview. You have a unique style, Robert. Very interesting and engaging always."
Oh, thank you very much.
So on
Thank
that
you very much.
amazing no, I'm going to bring the room to a close. Thank you, everyone who came and listened and shared your energy. Thank you, Robert. And we will be back with more interviews soon. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.